For a great cup of joe, there's one thing you should know. Your morning brew can also be playful. Buff Boy Brewing guys make the temperature rise, and you surely feel naughty when you swallow our coffee. If you want some real heat, give your mouth a fine treat. You will want some more, rest assured. Buff Boy Brewing, you can't get enough of.
It's time for The Scribble, your weekly fix of celebrity chats, bizarre stories in the news, and basic random chatter with best-selling author and syndicated radio host Jeremy Bradley. Make sure your seat is in the upright and locked position and your barf bag is securely in place. Here's Jeremy Bradley.
Thank you very much, Larson. Hey, you know that song that goes, "Let's talk about sex, baby"? Well, we're not talking about that today. We're going to talk about death, and it starts on The Scribble right after this.
Isn't it crazy that you wait for payday, but before you know it, you're strapped for cash again? It's time to stop blowing your money and become a smart spender with the book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate at cheapskatebook.com. Learn simple ways to cut costs at home every day and during special times of the year. Don't go broke at Christmas. Don't remortgage the house for a fancy vacation. The book is filled with tips to save you money throughout the year. Check out the best-selling book, The Official Guide to Being an American Cheapskate at cheapskatebook.com or on Amazon and iTunes.
Ever had something to get off your chest but never had the balls to say it? That's a load of crap. Speak Free with JB.com is exactly what you've been waiting for. Your chance to tell it like it is and not care what anybody else thinks. Have your say on issues of the day. Join newspaper and radio columnist Jeremy Bradley as he tells it like it is. Hundreds of thousands of people have stopped by, including some well-known celebrities who have had a chat with JB and speak candidly about what's really going on in the world. You can join them too. Have a rant or a rave. Be brave and head on over to www.speakfreewithjb.com now.
Jeremy Bradley here, back on The Scribble. So let's get to the fun stuff. Let's talk death. There you go. Isn't that a great introduction to this segment? No, it's one of those things where I think people either don't think about it because it's depressing, or don't think about it because it seems like it's such a far off thing, though, right? Like it's kind of, I'm still young, whatever. But people don't realize, like, well, no, if you get hit by a car tomorrow, it's kind of, definite at that time. It's kind of locked in at that point. And it's really strange. I'm 40, I'm about to be 42. And in very good health, right? And I'm of that mindset where I'm still sitting there going, I don't have any, diseases. I'm not withering away. I think that's kind of when people start to really think about their mortality, right? It's when you're diagnosed with something, right? And then you're going through the treatments, or you're in the hospital and, you're confined to a bed. And at that point, I don't want to say that it's too late, but I mean, it's kind of a little bit behind. And again, like I said, the same thing could be said for me right now, today, that when I walk out of here and leave, something could happen and I might not get home, right? Like that's just the reality. That's not being morbid or, gross or sadistic or anything like that. So I was out the other day walking my dogs, and it was on Wednesday. One of my former radio colleagues, he's generally off on Wednesdays, and so we, if it's a nice day out, he lives across the country, so I'll walk and talk and I'll walk my dogs and talk to him. Excuse me, and just out of nowhere, for some reason, and I'll have to text him. We got on the subject of death, and and he's in his he's 68, I think. Wait, he just had a milestone birthday during Corona, so yeah, he's about 68. And so he's older and he has some health issues, and he's been in a relationship for, 10, 11 years. And that complicates things if you're sometimes, depending on the laws where you live, right? If you're not legally married on paper, right? You could be common law, depending on how it all works where you live, right? And so we started talking about that, and he told me a story about how his brother moved away, lived in a different country for a while, and all of a sudden, my friend gets this call from some woman. He recognized the area code, but not the phone number. And so he answered it, and, oh, hi, this is so-and-so. You might not remember me, but I was married to your brother. Now, this was about 20 years ago that she was married to the guy. And so he's like, okay, how can I help you? And so she said, well, I hate to tell you, but your brother passed away. He died, and he was found in his house. And I guess the guy didn't remarry or anything. So just in terms of the records or whatever, they found this woman's name, contacted her. She's saying, well, I'm the ex-wife. I don't. And so they said, oh, well, he doesn't have any next of kin here. Do you know of anybody? And again, because this is a different country, they don't just easily have that access to go and say, oh, okay, well, this is the family. They don't go onto Ancestry.com and start tracking people down. We made that joke too. So then she started to dig and find some of the family members and reach out, and that's how she ended up getting a hold of my friend. And so, there you have a situation where this guy had, property, and you've got to figure all that kind of stuff out. He did not do any of the advanced planning. Now, this gentleman was older than my friend, so at least in his 70s then at that point, and still somebody who just hadn't thought about it. Now, what my friend said was because his brother didn't have anybody. In terms of, there was no kids that were going to get an inheritance or anything like that. So he just didn't bother. So then my friend goes and says, well, that's one thing that you need to think about, though, is there are going to be people potentially affected, whether that is your friends or whoever it might be, because now they're looped in to, maybe deal with things, get the body back to Canada or whatever, the deal is. I guess you technically could refuse. You could just go and say, well, that's not my responsibility. I'm not. But, for the most part, people would go and say, well, that's family. I can make arrangements. And we started to have a conversation about, well, you could sell his property. Thankfully, the guy owned a house, so there was money from that. And if you pay to, who then arranges to fly the body home or any of that kind of stuff, right? So, it reminded me because there was a show on HBO not that long ago. I don't remember the name of it, but it was basically showing different ways that people have chosen or had, I guess they're dead now, but they had chosen to die. And it was just, or ways to even be celebrated after their death. So one of them was had they cremated and then ashes were shot up into space. Another one was the exact opposite in the ocean, in a coral reef kind of a thing. There was sort of a little thing that they wanted to be buried there at sea. Another one was, somebody then wanted to be buried in the ground not in a coffin though, but almost like compost. I don't remember what they called it, but it was kind of wrapped in a biodegradable kind of a thing. And so that was a bit strange. They were just sort of buried in a forest. And then another guy, they showed he basically wanted to drink a medical concoction and basically die on his couch. And he had kind of a last supper, if you will, with his friends and family at the house. And then he basically had them all kind of I think they were kind of standing, but the friends and family were sort of back in the doorway. They weren't quite right there on the couch, but he was just laying there. He's like, just keep talking to me, everybody, just keep talking. And it's kind of weird because before I started watching the show, when I read the description, it came up on the screen of what this show was going to be. And I was kind of like, well, that's going to be a little bit morbid. It's going to be kind of weird. But they normalized it because it's a reality though, right? It's something that's going to happen. We're all going to die, whether that's, next week or in 40 years, 50 years, whatever it is. It's all going to happen to us. Or it's going to happen to all of us. That's the better, grammatically. Right? And so it was kind of eye-opening. And that's where it sort of then starts to make me think and go, well, we haven't really, my husband and I, he's from Brazil. I'm from Canada. Would I want to be buried in Brazil? No, I don't have family. And then we just started talking about funerals and the wishes of what you'd want. And so I started to talk about that with my friend, and I said, I told him, I'm like, I know that you're not going to want Bible verses and Amazing Grace and all these just different kinds of things because that's not who you are. And he said, no, I don't know. I said, so, you've been in your relationship, 10, 11 years. What have you and your partner decided? Have you had, what are you guys going to do? Is there going to be a service? Is there just going to be something, And he's like, well, it's one of those things that you kind of start talking about and then you don't really make any definitive decisions. You kind of have those conversations, but you don't put, maybe pen to paper or kind of lock anything in. And I said, yeah, that seems to be what happens with people. I mean, we've had that in my own family too, right? When you have a relative who dies, and I mean, some things are still up in the air, but unfortunately for us, when we've had death in the family, we've known that it's coming. I guess it's good and bad though, right? I mean, we haven't had anybody who was all of a sudden, killed in a crash or something. It's always been like an illness that eventually takes the person. So we've seen it coming. Again, is that good or bad? I mean, I compare that to when I had my 2 previous dogs. One of them had a blood disease and died, 9 days later, right in front of us on the living room floor, basically kind of had I don't know if it was a seizure or what. So that was kind of like, wow, we weren't expecting that. And then boom, no preparation. And then another one had, an eye infection that eventually, he was 13 years old, a golden retriever. The eye infection just spread to his thyroid and everything. And then within a matter of 2 days. And I had always thought when I have dogs, it's going to be cancer, right? There's going to be something that just gradually, because they're getting older, that's going to take their life. And for these 2 instances where they both were, by the time they were diagnosed, from the time they were diagnosed to the time that they had died, was less than 2 weeks. And so for me, that was kind of maybe the tougher thing, right? When you have a relative, if your grandma or somebody has cancer and they're in the hospital for months or weeks, you kind of start to, okay, like when my mom's dad, when my grandpa was in the hospital, I was working at a publishing company at the time. I don't know that, I don't know that I was on the radio yet. I don't think I was. But I just remember being in my office at the publishing company, and my dad would call me. Like I said, this was my mom's dad, so whenever there was communication, it was sort of coming from my dad to call my brothers and me. It wasn't my mom. My mom would go to the hospital first. My dad would kind of be, still at work or whatever. He would be the messenger to my brothers and me, and then, So I remember him, I don't know how many times. I just know that it happened quite regularly, that I would be at work. The phone would ring, I would see that it's him calling from his work. So I knew that if Dad's calling me from work, then it's something. And again, we knew that our family member was sick. So, but you're always expecting that next call to be, he's gone. And so what ended up happening was my grandpa just became progressively worse, obviously, as people are when they've got, he had a mouth cancer and then it went up to the brain. So it's only a matter of time. And I guess there were some overreactions, but again, he's a 90-year-old guy. It could be any moment, right? And what was happening was we were being called to the hospital over and over and over and over and over again, thinking that today is the end, or today is the last day, this is the end. And we were very fortunate that it wasn't, of course, I'm not saying that. But my point was that eventually you say goodbye enough, right? You've prepared yourself enough that when you're told, hey, he's dead, you're kind of okay with it at that point because it's been so long, right? And I'm not saying we weren't sad about my grandpa. Of course we were. Of course we were. Of course we were. He was that, that was the head of the family. But it doesn't sort of hit you as hard. And then you're almost relieved because, and I think I've heard a lot of people say this, well, he's out of pain now. And it's so you're sort of happy that it's happened. He's not suffering anymore. He's not struggling. He's not, going through what he was going through. Now, my grandpa, we're going back even probably 35 years now. When he had throat cancer, my grandpa was one of the first people that I had ever heard or known to have the hole in his neck and put the little machine to his throat, press the button, it makes the buzzing noise, and he talks that way. So even 35 years ago, he'd had, some cancer stuff going on. And then, we'd seen him through illness and sickness and all that kind of stuff. So at that point, at the later years in his life, or the last days of his life, he was at the point where he couldn't even really communicate or anything like that. And so at that point, you don't want to see that anymore. I felt that way about my dogs. Like I said, that I always figured that I would be selfish. I wouldn't want to put them down because that's my own selfishness of them leaving me. I'm not going to... But when you're in that situation of seeing them struggling, again, one had a blood disease, one had an eye infection that was spreading and getting worse. I don't want to see my blind dog crashing into things in the backyard, getting lost in the corner of the living room. Like it was just, it almost, there's something that in your head that just kind of switches and you're like, oh, yeah, this needs to end. And as sad as it is, my God, I mean, everybody knew from the time when I got Ernie, my golden retriever, that was sort of the beginning of my adulthood. I had bought a house, and then I think about month or about 2, maybe not even quite 3 months later, I needed a dog. I was on my own. I'd always wanted a dog. That's why I got a house with a big yard. And, it took me a while to get settled into my house, right? So I didn't go and buy my house and then the next day I get a dog. There was a bit of a settlement period. So that was he was with me from the time that I had moved out. He was there when my career in radio and newspaper in radio started. And it was really tough. And then again, you have that struggle of do I cremate? Do you bury him? I think most people just get their pets cremated, right? That's kind of the thing to do. And then that comes with more decisions. Do you want the urn sealed? Are you going to have it open? Are you going to spread them somewhere? Are you going to just put it on the fireplace? Like, what are you going to do with it? So there's just so many things what I would say is, you obviously don't plan ahead like that for a dog because you, again, want to stay optimistic. You don't want to think that the end is coming. But all of those kinds of things end up having to be decisions made in the moment. I remember my husband wasn't even in town when the one dog died, so I ended up going to the vet with my mom. And I remember her kind of having to just sort of step in and answer questions, and it wasn't even her dog. And because it felt so weird. Obviously, these are answers they need, to be given, but all of those kinds of things. Do you want the urn sealed? What do you like? And it was just so overwhelming. So yes, you plan ahead for a human funeral because there's things like headstone, cemetery, funeral service, all those kinds of things. And the pet thing, that's my equivalent because we don't have kids or anything like that. So yeah, it's weird. And then just fast forward like 2 days later, then my accountant, she texts and says, I'm heading out of town. I just got word that my sister died. And I thought, isn't it weird? I can go how many days, weeks, maybe even months without thinking about death, not having any sort of interaction with anybody about it. And now here's somebody who's facing death in her family, in her life. Then, if that's not weird enough or coincidental enough, that night, whatever day of the week it was, I don't remember what day it was, that she had sent that, there was, how at the end of the day you kind of wind down and you watch TV or, whatever it is. And so I have a couple of my usual retro sitcoms that I will watch at night. Seinfeld, Golden Girls, Will and Grace, what have you. And there was an episode of Seinfeld where, how at the beginning of the episode he does his stand-up, like you'll see, he'll be talking about something that's generally related to what's happening on that episode this week, and then again at the end of the show, he'll often come back on. So he's standing there saying that, funerals, like death is really weird because the person's dead, but yet we dress them up in a suit. They have a pillow, and they're laying in a box. It's a very kind of weird situation to be at a funeral. So that episode was on. So within a matter of like a few days, I have this like deep conversation with a friend about his, brother passing and what happens after somebody or even you die. And then I hear that a sister died from another friend, and then the Seinfeld episode. So I'm finding that's kind of happening a lot lately. Now I don't know if those kinds of coincidences have happened all my life, but there's something where I'm finding now parts of my day or week. Something else that I found is I might be reading something and I'll see the word sunrise or insurance, and then on TV somebody will say that word almost just as I'm reading it. Has that ever happened to you? Where you'll maybe, what I'm talking about, or you'll be, I don't know, you'll be out somewhere. I'm reading the word insurance, and then all of a sudden I hear a commercial in the background, and there was the word insurance. It's really weird to me. Anyway, so the Seinfeld episode made me then start to just think about the whole funeral thing, about how the cemetery is also kind of a weird thing where you just go and dig out the ground and put somebody in there. So it reminded me of my grandma's funeral that happened a few years ago. She had died during Corona, and we couldn't do anything. Like, we weren't able to have something. She went to church all the time, so we knew that she wanted to do something at the church. So we had to wait. She was cremated, so it's not like they just, kept her, on a slab somewhere, in a freezer. She was cremated, so that's fine. And I was talking with my cousin the other day, and And then I said, oh, I've been having these conversations about death with people. Like, it's kind of weird. I've never really sort of had these deep kind of... Generally, my conversations with people are sort of surface level and silly and stupid. So I'm talking to my cousin, and she said, do you remember what we did after the funeral? And I said, well, we probably drank, or did we go somewhere? What did we do? She said, no, at the cemetery, we did a big group photo. As we were talking, she goes and finds it. She counts. There were 37 of us in the photo. We did a group photo at the cemetery. We had somebody, the one she told me, then I remember, because I also had the picture on my phone, I just had to find it. We had somebody who was there with like a flatbed truck. I think he was a groundskeeper, somebody from the actual cemetery. Called him over and was like, hey, can you take a group picture of all of us? Now, the thing was, like I said, my grandma was cremated, so it wasn't like we were posing with a coffin or anything. But it was strange because there were so many of us, and we were in front of her headstone. So the group of us, we're completely just block her. You see the headstones and everything in front of our group, and then to the side, and then in the distance behind. But you don't even see my grandma. So I could look at that picture and go, well, that's my family. Obviously, it was somebody on my mom's side because that's who's in the picture. And then you're having to kind of figure out, well, I mean, we haven't had many deaths, thankfully, so I knew that it was my grandma. But I thought that was something really weird. And I remember thinking that in the moment, too, because people were kind of looking at us as they were going by. And I remember thinking, like, let's do this as quickly as possible. This is a bit strange. And so apparently, though, I mentioned this to some of my colleagues after I had that conversation with my cousin, and it's not uncommon to do that now. I think it was Bonnie Winters, she's of a certain age, 70, where she said, you used to take pictures of even the dead body at a funeral. She said, yes, at home, this is her saying it, she said, I remember my mom showing us photo albums, and you're just going through, the photo albums were kind of, it was almost like a year in review. It was sort of chronological when things happened, right? Because you'd start filling up the photo album at the front, obviously. And there's a new baby. Okay, and this was the baby shower. And then there was Christmas, and then there was something, and then you flip the page, and there's a dead woman laying in a box. And she said, oh, now you used to take pictures all the time of the dead body. Almost close up, too. Almost like right in their face. They didn't have this digital stuff back then. You had to get right up there with your little Polaroid or whatever it was. And so I thought, well, that's kind of interesting because it happened back then. Then there's kind of this weird generation. Like, I would never have thought to start taking pictures. I mean, I guess we didn't have camera phones when I was younger, but you just did. Like, why would you want to remember those kinds of things? Why are you wanting to see pictures of people being sad and devastated? It didn't make sense. And then all of a sudden, here we are, all 37 of us grinning and big smiles at a cemetery. It's just kind of strange to me. And let me also just reiterate here, I'm not saying that this was any sort of disrespect, like, haha, grandma's dead. We not at all. But it's just, so it's kind of weird how we have these sort of weird things happen. Now, on the subject of death, I was talking about my mom's side of the family. I'm going to talk about my dad's side of the family. They're giving me like the big heave-ho wrap-up because I've gone 20 minutes and not taken a breath. So we're going to take a break, talk more about it right after this.
It's never too early to start thinking about your next holiday. Have you checked out Mexico recently? From tequila tasting, swimming with horses, to ziplining through the jungle and watching whales and dolphins in their natural habitat, Puerto Vallarta has it all. Visit mexico.jbonair.com to see all the fun PV has to offer. That's at mexico.jbonair.com for hundreds of photos, interviews, and videos from around the tourist hotspot. Check out mexico.jbonair.com for all the fun. That's mexico.jbonair.com.
Who are the Kardashians feuding with now? What did that little thug Justin Bieber do this time? Who's getting hitched? And who's headed for Splitsville? Hear the latest celebrity news and gossip every day on Entertainment Wrap-Up. The good, the bad, the ugly, but mostly the ridiculously hilarious. It's all recapped in this daily segment at entertainmentwrapup.com. Have a laugh at the expense of the rich and famous when they take themselves way too seriously. It's 3 minutes of time-wasting fun at entertainmentwrapup.com. Check out Entertainment Wrap-Up at entertainmentwrapup.com. Brought to you by Speak Free Books.
JB here, back on the Scribble. You still with me? Still with me? You didn't die? You're there? Okay. Just talking about my dad's side of the family. Now, we went for a stretch of probably about 5 or 6 years where there was one death every year, and it almost kind of became a running joke of who's next. We haven't had anybody die this year. Somebody's about to go. Now, my dad's side of the family wasn't all that close leading up to those deaths, though. So really, the only times that we were seeing each other were at a funeral. And at that time, I was just beginning my career in journalism, and I was a newspaper columnist. And one of the very first columns that I wrote was called Death Brings Us Closer Together. And it was interesting to me because now at that point, we had already had, I think, maybe 2 of the series of deaths. And it was kind of strange because here I am. It's not that I'm meeting my cousins for the first time, but I'm having conversations with them for the first time. And at that point, I would have been in my 20s. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wasn't in my 30s. I would have been in my 20s. And it's kind of strange because we did Christmases with them when I was very young. I was probably about 5 or 6. And then we just stopped. And as kids, we were just told that, well, the family doesn't get together anymore. It wasn't until these funerals where you're having your own grown-up conversations with your relatives. On my dad's side of the family, my cousins are generally about 10 to 15 years older than my brothers and me. So we were always we were a lot younger. We didn't really play with them at Christmas or anything like that. And so we've kind of formed relationships at that point now. And we start talking and they're like, well, no, the family was still getting together. Just you guys weren't coming. And we're like, wait a second, hold on. Wait. So everybody was still getting together, but we just weren't invited? No, your dad was blah, blah, blah. Apparently he had some issues with family members. And we did not know that, right? Because as kids, you're sort of sheltered from those kinds of things. It's just easy for your parents to go and say, well, they don't get together anymore. And it did sort of strike me odd going and saying, did you just stop doing Christmas? Like, are we Jewish now? How do you just stop doing Christmas? Like, did they all move out of the city? Like, how do we not do anything? Then we come to find out my dad had this drama with his siblings, and then there was just no contact. But from that point, so I guess the last death of that series, I'm calling it, the last death of that was 15 years ago then. So that take me into my mid-20s, late 20s. And also maybe thanks to social media, you kind of stay in contact with people a little bit more, right? Now you can be a friend on their page or whatever and see their updates. I have had, get-togethers with my cousins. We've had some great, drinks, night out, bowling, whatever it is. And it was just interesting because you'd think that in this time of mourning, it could go one of 2 ways, right? Either you're distant from your family, so it's not a big deal, and maybe you're shunned or you just don't go at all. But instead, it all of a sudden forms these new relationships. What's happening is I'm taking in too much air and not, and I'm burping is what's going on. I'm being a Wendy Williams. I'm just going to start letting them belch out of my mouth. So it was interesting because death did bring us closer together on my dad's side. We then started having conversation. I got to know my family members. It was just sort of weird where you think this should be a sad time, and given the strained relationship that my dad had with everybody, and we didn't have any relationships as kids with them, that now that we can speak for ourselves and we're old enough, now we're just like, what was that all about? We know what it was. My dad was a bit racist and said some things when my uncle married a Filipino woman, and that was a big deal for my dad, again, 35 or 30 some years ago. That was, his white brother was marrying a Filipino woman. How dare you? How dare you? And now we're people change, I guess. People evolve, people grow, people change. And yeah, that was it. It was that, there was racism in the family. And I gotta say, for my aunt, the Filipino woman that he married, I actually kind of like her better than I like my white uncle. I'm just getting all kinds of personal here. I think she's a wonderful woman. I don't really care for that uncle, but I love her. I just the memories that I have of her from when I was, when I was at their wedding or just the other family weddings that we had when we were super young. I remember dancing with her and having laughs with her. And then even when we've had these get-togethers, as of late, just different things, I think she's great. It's the white dude I can't stand. Oh, there you go. Am I getting the wrap up already? We're gonna do. Is it a quick break and then we're done? All right, whatever. Stick around.
We hear you chirping. Get scribbling. Tweet up the Scribble at The Scribble Show. Join the discussion with Jeremy Bradley. It's all going down right now on Twitter at The Scribble Show and at thescribbleshow.com.
So tell me what you think about death. There you go. 30 minutes. I mean, I know that I talk a lot. I don't think I'd have ever talked 30 minutes straight. That's different than a conversation with somebody. I'm just saying 30 minutes talking to you about death. The email address live@jbonair.com. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye now.
Want more Scribble? Check out thescribbleshow.com for past shows, celebrity interviews, cheapskate tips, and more. That's at thescribbleshow.com and on Twitter at The Scribble Show. The Scribble is a speak-free media presentation.
If you want some